giving us a presentation. Caren Welborne has worked in clinical research for over 22 years with 15 years of leadership for projects in oncology and rare disease settings. She's been an OEFFA member for the last couple of years. She has a master's degree in pharmaceutical sciences, a bachelor's degree in biology and environmental sciences. And she also has a culinary arts certificate from Cincinnati State. So she works in the pharmacological area as well as in food. So she's well positioned to talk to us this evening about healthy eating and pharmaceuticals. And so I think, Caren, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks, Corey. I'm going to attempt to share the presentation. So let's see how this goes. Let's say share. I'm going to go ahead and put it in. Let's go ahead and do this. Okay. Does that look like a larger screen and you can see this? Let's see if I can. Yeah? You're on mute. I can't hear you.
That's good, Caren.
Okay, super. Well, right. So thanks everybody for joining me. I'm excited to talk about clinical trials and good eating and kind of how they come together. You know, and hopefully you learned something today. I think with this crowd, you all could probably teach me quite a bit about good food and local food and growing good food. But as Corey mentioned, I've been in most of my professional career has been in clinical research. I work for a company that's sort of, it's called Contract Research Organization. And by contract, we contract with pharmaceutical companies or biotech companies to run their clinical trials. As Corey mentioned, I've been in for a long time. I've got a degree related to pharmaceutical and clinical development. And, you know, this talk sort of came up as I was giving that introduction some months ago at a SWOEFFA meeting. And, you know, the conversation, you know, a lot of people do not know what clinical research is. I think now we are hearing a lot more about drug research, vaccine development, and recognizing how long it takes to get a pharmaceutical or a therapeutic into the market. But back then, it wasn't as much of a focus, but I had introduced my profession as, you know, being, you know, one that would, you know, be part of the research for a COVID vaccine. And as we talked during that conversation at that last SWOEFFA call, you know, some of the comments were, you know, we have a lot of discussion in the media and news and a lot of attention on vaccine development, drug development for this COVID, but there's not really any conversation about good eating and just overall good health. And that really should be, you know, something that we talk about as well. And so that's where this talk kind of started in this presentation. I think it's very, very timely based on, you know, we're kind of entering in to flu season, unfortunately. So maybe we'll all be inspired to to be a little healthier. It's very timely. So that's what we're all about today. We'll talk about two things primarily: drug studies and good eating. I start off with clinical trials or drug studies, and this is a really nice graphic, and I hope you can see it rather well. It's from a group called Vigilantics. They're apparently a drug, a medical document company out in California. But I thought they had a nice graphic. I like to show people pictures. I think it is a little bit more interesting than just the words on the page. And you can see in this graphic sort of some different colors. The section A here is preclinical testing. And then we have the clinical research piece, and that's the primary large piece of the timeline here. We have final data analysis, and then we have follow-up. And so just briefly, preclinical means, essentially, as you could imagine, before the clinic or before the drug gets into humans. And this is all of our bench work in laboratory science. It's addressing questions like, should this drug formulation be in a pill or a capsule, IV, how long is it good for? And also preclinical is the animal testing as well. How does this drug react in the body, either of a mouse or a rat? Primate is also something that's required. And so, all of that is a lot of science and a lot of work that happens before we, end up in drug studies in humans. And so clinical research is all about drugs, new drugs in humans. To go from preclinical to clinical, you have to get the green light from the FDA. And the FDA is, is sort of our watchdog, our regulatory body in clinical research. They're relatively new, 1906. I mean, that's pretty new when you consider, how long our country's been in existence and actually how long medicines have been around. But they have jurisdiction not just over food products, but also drugs, of course, and not just drugs and pharmaceuticals, but biologics, which is where the vaccines tend to fall in, and also medical devices. So, pacemakers or stents or something like that, that also requires its own research and research in humans. So the FDA has an enormous sort of jurisdiction and they're relatively new. So to get from preclinical to clinical, pharma companies present a new drug, an investigational drug application to the FDA, and they present all of their animal studies, their stability testing, et cetera. And then finally, we're in clinical research. And this is what we hear about in the news. And I think that probably a number of you have heard terms like phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. And you can imagine what that is. It's sort of progressing through the lifetime of research. And phase 1 is really where we usually have healthy, normal volunteers. And there's a couple of local groups who do phase one testing here in Cincinnati. MedPace is one, I think New Horizons Research. And they have people who are, not sick, but, well, and are willing to, go to a phase 1 unit, have a medication be infused, and they typically are watched over a course of days to make sure that they are not having adverse reactions. And during that phase 1 testing, that is where you really are trying to find the right dose and how much medication you need to give to a person to have adequate exposure in the body. You also have to balance that, of course, with adverse events. This is all about safety and trying to, make sure you have the right dose and not, get these people sick with your medication, because that is a real risk with anything foreign to the body. So that's the balancing act. So you're looking at safety primarily in phase 1. And then, as you progress into testing and go through your timeline of review in phase 2, 3, you go into the patient population who you want to get well. So, you start with healthy normals usually, and then you move into, the people who have what you want to solve. And so as you progress down the line, you are really looking at not just safety and all the adverse events that are possible, but also, is it working in the context of this disease state? So is it effective? So two primary goals of clinical research always and forever will be safety and efficacy. So is it safe to take and curing or impacting in a positive way the disease state that you're looking to impact? And there's a lot of other things related to clinical research, but generally speaking, as you progress into phase 3 and 4, you're getting into larger studies still in the patient population, making sure you really are doing good and no harm, or not a lot of harm. Okay. And then you, as a pharma company, you take that research and you collect it, you put it into a final study report or a package application. And in the US, we submit it to the FDA again. This is your next very large submission to the FDA. And this is a new drug application. And this allows you as a pharma company to sell this new medication into the American public. You have a good case of safety and efficacy, and the FDA says, yes, you can sell this drug, market this drug. And so final data analysis is what that is. And that is the primary goal for a pharmaceutical company to do. The other thing worth mentioning, and I think will be very, very relevant with our COVID vaccinations once we get them, is the follow-up. So much is wonderful about clinical studies in that it is a very, it's essentially a science experiment where, it's tight. It is, it is people of age of, 18 to, 55. They have the disease state. They have good liver function. They have good kidney function. It's a protocol and really sort of specific on the patient population to really show whether or not the drug is impacting the disease or not. Once you get into the market, you no longer have the parameters of a study. You have the population, and people could be older than 65 and receive a medication that is newly developed, or they can be have morbidity, disease states. They could be on other medications. So that's a really important component of the follow-up that has to happen. And other, when other events happen in the population, it's really important for our doctors, clinical researchers to collect those new safety data in the larger population. It's called post-marketing studies, and collect that and make sure that the drug is still doing what it needs to do in this broad population. So that's in a nutshell, clinical trials. It's an enormous amount of time, as you could probably imagine. And I do, I'm going to sort of show, pharmaceuticals as a business. Of course, pharma is a, for-profit type of situation. I thought it was important to show this. This is, this is somewhat dated information, but it kind of brings home the point. We have our costs, and then we have our revenues here. And this isn't really apples to apples, it's different timeframes. So the cost of the drug development here, as early as soon as 2000, as recent or as current as 2007. So it's probably off this chart by now, right? But they have, at least in this little reference by Tufts, the cost in the billions, 2.5 billion in 2007. So this is, for sure, clinical trials are a costly component to what pharma has to deal with and manage. But there's revenues involved in it, and that, we have to talk about that as well. This graphic, again, not 2007, but now 2010, and it progresses into 2018, so a little bit more current. And this is their sales and revenue. I'm not even sure which one is which, but it's around, $450 billion in either sales or revenue, which is amazing. So anyway, it's certainly, if the costs are kind of down here, and I know it's not down here, this is quite dated, but it's probably not to 450 billion, right? So it's certainly a business that makes money for the companies and stockholders, et cetera. In the US, we are bombarded by pharma advertising. This is just a couple of the little snippets I was able to grab. If you watch the evening news or the morning news, there's a good chance you'll be seeing some Lipitor medications or some medications for sure. It's really pretty unavoidable. So marketing, is certainly something we do. In Europe, that they don't have this, at least direct consumer marketing, at least in TV, maybe in billboards. But I think in the U.S. we've unfortunately have the luck of having the medication and the bombardment of advertising that's allowable by the regulations. So anyway, it's just more commentary on how this is definitely a business for sure. In contrast, right, to good eating and sort of where we start with good eating, and I should say clinical research, it's absolutely, worth it, but it sort of plays well to our modern life. And I think even before times, we were very anxious, of immediate, sort of immediate gratification. And maybe in this time, of modern life, we are sort of there. But good eating is a much more gradual process. It's not a cure, it's not a pill, but it's been through the test of time. And Hippocrates actually, so this is before Christ. I'm sure many are familiar with the name and sort of the Hippocratic Oath. And first do no harm. This is something that doctors sort of take or physicians take their oath, first do no harm, or something like that. And this is a Greek physician, sort of tagged as the father of Western medicine. And he was the one that's sort of attributed to saying, at least according to Google, that let food be thy medicine and medicine be thy food. And I think at each SWOEFFA call, I've heard that term, and I can't, or that phrase, can't agree with it more, really. But he, being, back in the way back day, he is attributed also to using sort of this lifestyle medicine and, really modifying your diet as well as your exercise to treat your ailments. So this is not a new idea, being, eating well for the sake of good health, for sure. So Hippocrates, I thought that was a good place to start. So the CDC has a Center for Chronic Disease Prevention, and they actually have an amazing amount of information on their website. they do have a lot of data, and this is one snippet. This that I thought was, sort of played well with the conversation tonight. This is either it's 2011 or 2013. The report had 2013 on it, but it looks like the little snip of the graphic here is 2011. So it's around that time. This is the median daily intake of vegetables among adults. And, you can see that, sort of the most is, 1.8 veg a day to less than 1.5 veg a day. And this is actually a pretty tight, tight amount. But I think it's rather telling. There's not too much green in this in the U.S. And I think the other component here is, when you think that this is adults, it's possible that children, they don't have children data, at least the graphic, that children are possibly much less, which is a bit more concerning, right? But you can see how it kind of fades yellow as we kind of move into the center of the states, which I think is interesting. Either coast seems to be a little bit more green here. But the moral of the story is our daily vegetable intake doesn't seem to be making the grade here. For balancing sake, I wanted to think about good eating in terms of a business like pharma. And, and we all here, a lot of folks here are producers. And again, this is not a graphic sort of shown in the same way as our pharma information, but remember that, remember their y-axis was around $450 billion, right? And here we are kind of in 2018, sort of in the, not yet breaking the $100 billion. It looks like 2012 and 2013 were bigger years. But we are, as far as good eating as a business goes, it really is a little bit, not really on the same chart as the pharmaceuticals, right? A little bit different. Again, thinking about marketing and how we market good eating, it's not as profitable, so there isn't as much of a budget for marketing. So we'll have to say that. But we don't get as much marketing for good eating necessarily. I would say, or at least in my experience, to relative to the pharmaceuticals and the pills that we can buy. And this is just a little bit of a sampling. This I think is the USDA, and then of course the organic labeling, which I hope we can talk about in another session. But I know there's a lot of controversy around about that label and confusion. And and then vegetables. Kids don't like their vegetables, right? But it doesn't have to be that way. So the marketing is totally different, very different indeed. Of course, the budget is too. So just to sort of compare and contrast here to pharma and good eating, like we've looked at tonight, pharma is controlled trials, specific populations, highly regulated, high cost, but high profit, highly marketed, manufactured, and in some cases, a lot of cases, curative or thought to be curative. It may be an immediate impact, but not always, and I think any of these things could be not always, right? But, generally speaking, pharma is, sort of high cost, high profit, it's a different track. Good eating, in contrast, very broad level. This is not, we're not testing the population on eating, good apples or whatever. There's not science. there is science, but it isn't as promoted, I would say, as pharma. So it's very broad scope, not as regulated, but the FDA and USDA, I think, some people in the meat producing probably could argue that that is not the case. It's quite regulated. There's many stipulations and requirements there, I understand. But there's not clinical rigor, clinical studies necessarily about food. It is also high cost, possibly lower profit, at least based on some of the graphs we saw tonight, and that's relative to pharma. Marketed less or less impactful, as far as the labeling goes, and some of the pictures we saw. It's not manufactured. In fact, it's of the earth in general. I think that, again, there's caveats to this as we think about different things that we can ingest. But generally speaking, it's of the earth, or should be, right? And then as thinking about Hippocrates, and it's more of a preventative. It's more of a gradual. If I have a diagnosis of or if I have an asthma attack, I can't depend on my eating my apple and having that be solved, right? It needs an immediate kind of sort of impact. So there's definitely some similarities. They support ailments, both pharma and good eating, but they're possibly a different approach when it comes to both of them. So food for thought, right? We got to end with that. I would say that good eating and pharma have a place for us as we sort of march into our pandemic, or continue on with this, endure with this pandemic situation, and as we march into the flu season. Good eating and balanced diet is as old as the hills, right? Before Christ, right? We've got that documented. Definitely worth our attention and focus. But pharmaceutical in clinical research and drug development, certainly a newer concept relative, and definitely a lot of rigor, not perfect for sure. But if it's an ailment, and as serious as COVID-19 or other, there are many other things. I think with the guidance of a physician, it's certainly worth an important tool to help people live longer, or have a good life for some time. The last thing that I wanted to mention, that I think is very relevant, or just an observation. We have heard a lot about the United States response to COVID, how it's been poor and sort of disjointed, et cetera, and it's sort of unfortunately become like a political sort of debacle, like a lot of things, right? But one thing that no one, or I haven't heard yet, no one's talking about sort of our baseline health in the United States. Often we're compared to Europe and Western Europe, because we, at least they're the closest to us, possibly in terms of industrial way and our way of life. But I think that, they are, for folks who have traveled to Europe, they're a little bit more active, a little bit more seasonally sort of in tune, possibly, I would say, at least that I've observed, and possibly more healthy, right? And so because of that sort of focus. So I just am curious, I'm wondering, could this, it be, the COVID sort of death rate in the United States be relative to our baseline health, and that is lower in relative to EU and other parts of the of the world, you know, versus, you know, sort of our general overall response. But anyway, I you know, just food for thought. I thought it was very, very applicable to the talk tonight. And yeah, so I think that concludes. I do have some references, you know, just to be complete about things. If people have you know, curiosities, and if you want this presentation, I'm happy to share that too. So anyway, are there questions or are there comments? I'd really like to hear.
Okay, I haven't seen any questions in the chat box. So how about we go back to the screen where everyone is. And Christy, is there a good way for people to indicate that they want to ask a question?
Sure. So at this point, if anyone wants to unmute themselves and ask a question, you're welcome to, and you can use the chat box as well.
Great.
Well, this is Steve. I'll just jump in. Thanks, Karen. That was neat.
Yeah.
So it reminds me, and I see Jackie Dean's on here. I think that's with Jeff Dean and dairy farmers. But the one thing I learned from Gary Zimmer was that dairy farmers who put a lot of stress on their cows to produce large amounts of milk, they test their feed all the time. And when they make up their rations, they know exactly the nutritional content of what they're feeding the cows so that they don't make the cows sick or die because they're trying to get a lot of milk from them. And by contrast, we don't have any idea what the nutritional content is of the food we eat. And it kind of goes back to the old question of is organic food have more nutrition? Is it higher density compared to conventional? So it came to mind when you're talking about, you know, how the pharmaceutical industry is highly regulated and the eating is not. But we don't have a very good idea of the nutritional content of the stuff we eat, let alone that we're eating junk part of the time. But so I just wanted to make that comment. There is a lot of interest now in the nutritional density of the food we eat and how do you measure that and how do you relate it back to how it was grown.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, isn't it interesting? I mean, you know, I share that opinion too. I think you know, what we ingest on a regular basis should be something that we know much more about than a pill that we may take. You know, I mean, now some people, if they have a chronic situation, you know, have to take medication regularly. And, you know, but yeah, it's almost, you know, it's almost counter, what do you want to say, counterintuitive, right? You know, we ingest this every day. We should have every confidence in what it is. I guess one person could say that, you know, this it can't be that bad, right? You know, it's not manufactured. You know, it's not like a, you know, Lord only knows what a manufactured thing could do in the body versus, you know, some other you know, food that comes from the ground. You know, I don't know. Could it be that bad? But I agree with you, Steve. I think you know, we should feel comfortable and confident in what we eat every day.
Great. I've got one question. Lisa asked if anyone uses a refractometer on their crops to measure nutrient density. So any of the people that are here know about those or use them? Lisa, do you want to say a little bit more about that?
Hey, I was just typing that in the comments. Actually, I was just like right now looking at Nigel Palmer's new book, and he's got a whole table of ratings on different vegetable crops.
Oh,
You know,
really?
yeah, poor, average, good, and excellent on the refractive index. It's bricks, you're measuring sugar. So it was something I've been considering getting. I just wonder if anyone else has already been using one and if there's much of a difference in sourcing a refractometer like on Amazon or someplace else.
Yep, if nobody else jumps in, who's not, has anyone else actually done it? Use a refractometer? I mean, I've been to workshops where they talk about it, and it does measure the sugar level, so it's not a direct nutrient density. It's a fairly simple device, and it depends on what time of day you do it. But people do use it to see how the crop is. And more, there's tissue testing, which I think is probably the next step. It takes more time for the person to get the samples together. It costs more, but at least it lets you know what is actually getting into your crop, as opposed to just knowing what you dump on the soil from a soil test. So the refractometer is a simple, fast way to get a sugar level reading, and you can do it over time to see how that changes. And you could do it in response to whether you water or whether you put fertilizer on maybe. But the people that are really pushing nutrient density now and knowing what it is are going to the tissue testing, and they do that regularly. And then they do foliar applications and maybe some fertigation applications of fertilizer if they see a nutrient deficiency in the plant tissue. But that's a whole bigger level than most of the people I know to do. We're lucky to get the stuff planted and weeded and picked, let alone do the nutrient testing. Although there's a group that's working on they're trying to get it calibrated now, and I forget the name of it, and I forget the group. It's
Bionutrient Food Association's working on a handheld one that you can just scan stuff in the grocery store and you don't actually have to like mash up the vegetable.
Right. Thank you. And I think they're doing studies now to try to get it calibrated so that they know to make it actually work. Does anyone else know more about that?
I know they have some big organizations backing them for sure.
And would that be just sugar content too? Or is that something that would have more of the nutrients?
I'm not sure. You know, Glenn Gall really follows them very closely. I think the thing with the bricks and the sugar content is it's basically the higher sugar indicates, you know, your level of photosynthesis that's going on. So, you know, if you have more complete photosynthesis, you're going to have higher sugar levels. So it's just a fast, easy test that you can do yourself kind of thing. But the thing that Bionutrient's working on, basically they're looking at it as a game changer from the consumer standpoint, because they can just go into a grocery store and pick the best, highest nutrient dense carrots on the shelf kind of thing.
Right. And then that goes back to the question of, does a plant really care whether it gets its nutrients from a soluble chemical fertilizer or from a biologically released ion? Because it could be, you know, if you dumped a lot of soluble fertilizer on a carrot crop, you could have a higher nutrient density than an organic farmer who farms by the organic by neglect. They don't do anything. They just plant it and harvest it. And then it's possible that product density, the nutrient density in that vegetable would be lower than the conventional farmer who dumps on a lot of soluble.
I don't know. My understanding is chemical fertilizer is like junk food for your plants, really. I mean, it's like going to be a quick rush of nutrients, but it's not going to be something that's like quality, long lasting. But, you know, I could get into that for a while, but I won't.
And if you know your farmer and you trust your local farmer and that's where you get your food, you might not need one of those gadgets, as my dad probably would have said, those newfangled gadgets. So knowing your farmer and trusting your food producer, your local farmer, probably go a lot further than even than the test at the grocery store. So anyway, that's my rant. And then the other thing I wanted to mention, and it changes the subject, which I just wanted to toss it in here. I thought it was really dramatic to see Caren comparing pharma profits to farming profits, which I'm not surprised. I'm not at all surprised at it. It's just shocking. Not surprising, just shocking. That obviously, well, it seems to me, obviously, that people are willing to pay more for drugs than they are for food. That's probably a rant too. So anyway.
One thing I was going to comment on that as I thought about it, and if I read the graphs right. So the pharma was sales, total drug sales, or roughly, but the net farm income would be the raw material. So I mean, you're talking about bushels of corn and pounds of potatoes, and so the net farm income wouldn't be the same as what people spend on food. There'd be a lot of additional, well, it would be raw food. It wouldn't be any processed food or food that you would pick up at the store.
Yeah. Yeah.
It'd be interesting to see what we spend on food a year.
Yeah, I tried to find something that was equitable, and I couldn't find, nobody's really looking at these two things together, but it is striking, and I can only imagine, it being very, very different in terms of, it's such a different industry, when you produce, pills or you produce your new medication, it's off of, it's like the widgets, it is an immediate, production kind of thing, in stark contrast to, sort of the traditional farm experience and business, where you have your seeds, you plant your seeds, you have to wait some amount of time, and then you have your product, and you hopefully can have a consumer there, and your marketing is and nowhere near the situation that pharma can sort of support. So it really is very, very different, but it is. There's certainly a lot of cost and revenue to it, to both, really, right? I think food production is a very costly sort of endeavor, it seems.
I thought it was interesting, Caren, when we were looking at cost, the marketing and so forth, and that fresh food is very rarely marketed. But there's a lot of marketing money that goes into processed junk food, which I think is, pretty interesting as well.
Well, that's all just following the profit margin. I mean, that's something I've been looking at. Your highest profit margin food in the grocery store is all the sugar food. That's where people are making their money. So that's where you see your marketing and your advertisement, and that's what's at the checkout. It's always going to be the highest profit margin foods. And usually produce is like sold at a loss, really. And I mean, grocery store margins are like 1% to 2% or something. We looked into starting a food co-op, so we did all this background research kind of thing. So it's, and I think it's just following the money, and that's why there's so much going into pharma. It's their profit levels are so much better than like putting money into farming, because our profit levels are not as good,
Yeah, I'll add, I just, at an annual physical, I tend to have low iron counts, and my doctor just immediately said, here's a name of a pill that you could take, wrote it down in case I wanted to fill a prescription, and left no conversation for possible, things to insert into my diet to raise the level. And I understand there's pharmaceutical sales reps and that would be an offer, but it wasn't even part of food wasn't even part of the conversation. And I just think that's such an imbalance to not have your primary care physician at least speaking in both categories.
Mhm.
Well, it used to be, and it probably still is, that medical doctors in their training have very little education on nutrition, you know, and unfortunately a lot of our schooling for medical doctors is paid by big pharma, you know, so it's the same thing with agriculture, and the chemical industry is really influencing a lot of things in agriculture. It's pharma's influencing a lot of things with educating doctors.
In hindsight, I wish I would have just like said something right there then to her, you know, like when you see something, say something, just, I don't know, to maybe next time, I mean, just from a personal standpoint, to care about your patient a little, in my opinion, that care is, yeah, it needs to be both sides of the coin. I just wish I would have pressed her more on. I mean, I understand some things I can eat, you know, independently, but it just really is bothersome to me not to even mention it.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. You can still advise, you know, send her a note and on that. I mean, I if it bothers you, you should, you know, I think, and I think it's a really valid point. In prep to this, I did see a couple of articles about that exact thing. You know, I think it was, you know, of course, it's California. This physician in California who was treating, you know, this is hypercholesterol patients, and you know, really talking to them about, you know, how they purchase food and what are you doing. And it was just as Lisa was saying, you know, it's the high sugary, high fat, highly processed, you know, food that this particular, you know, physician had seen with this patient. And you know, there was some conversation about moving toward, you know, having physicians move toward a broader conversation, you know, where it includes diet and exercise. And I think a good one is cholesterol and weight issues. You know, that's just such an obvious one. Iron isn't as much, but definitely it makes sense, you know, to try, you know, to try your own experiment, right? And you know, eat your broccoli and see how it goes for your next physical exam. It's good that you have that knowledge, though.
I wanted to jump in here. You had said that you hadn't heard people talking about the difference, why the difference between EU and the United States. And I thought I might share that, well, probably most of us have heard that a lot of the people who are in the hospital suffering the morbidity and the mortality with COVID-19 have cardiovascular disease, hypertension, diabetes, and overweight. And there was a study done, I think it was Duke, but they used the 5 parameters of metabolic health, that being blood pressure, weight, HDL levels, triglyceride levels, and blood glucose levels to evaluate people. And per their study, only 12% of US adults meet those 5 criteria for metabolic health. 88% of the US population is metabolically dysfunctional.
What?
On one of those, yes. So, and in the theory, a theory behind this is that high insulin levels are driving this, that perhaps the dietary goals that we were told to eat, a low-fat diet, which by default becomes high carb, drives up insulin levels, which drives up weight, drives up blood pressure, drives up blood glucose as the pancreas gives up and can't keep up with the carb content of the diet. So there's been some pretty fascinating research with dropping the carbohydrate content of the diet. And one of the most exciting things is a company called Virta Health, VIRTA, and they're using telemedicine and a low carbohydrate diet to address metabolic dysfunction. And so I think they're into their 5th year of research, and they're publishing this in established journals. But they have been able to put diabetes, type 2 we're talking about, not type 1, into remission. They've been able to return blood pressure to normal. Weight falls away as insulin levels come back down. So but most doctors aren't aware of this. This is actually, and this is not kind of a new faddish idea, because a low carbohydrate diet was the way we treated diabetes back before pharma, before insulin, and before the oral diabetic agents. That was the accepted treatment. And so this isn't some crazy left field idea. So I would, if you're interested, check out Virta Health online, or there's a site that was originally a Swedish site, but it's now globally kind of the info central about this sort of thing, and it's called dietdoctor.com. It has now been translated into English and multiple other languages too, but it's evidence-based. There are lots of physicians, nutritionists, established credentialed people who monitor and write the content on the site. They accept no advertising from food industry or pharma. And so they have a lot of information about this if you're interested.
Yeah, thank you for that. That's really interesting.
It is, because it's happening, yet it's almost like it's a grassroots effort. Traditional medicine isn't looking there yet.
Yeah.
Can we get your name? And then,
Peggy Nestor.
okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks, Peggy. We've got a comment from Marcy. We had talked a couple of meetings ago about 80 Acres, which is the hydroponics place in Cincinnati. Actually, they have a couple of locations now, I think. And she said that they're working on foods with particular nutrient profiles, and they see that in the future, they may have a doctor that could give a prescription for a food with the nutrients we're lacking, rather than a prescription for a pharmacological. So I think that's very interesting. And I was going to comment to you too, Christy. One of the last times I went to give blood, my hematocrit was low. And I immediately came home and printed off a sheet of foods high in iron, so that, I could try to do with that with my leafy greens instead of taking any kind of a supplement. So, but yeah, we definitely, I think all of us have an opportunity to educate our doctors when we see them too, to, say, oh, well, gee, rather than that prescription, maybe we should look at something else. So. That's great.
Regarding a produce prescription, Produce Perks does, they started it, I want to say maybe 3 years ago, and they work with various clinics, and they do, doctors at the clinics do prescribe produce for health. And then they give coupons, so to speak, that the patient can take to their farmer's market and redeem those coupons for produce. That's here in Cincinnati, but it's also Produce Perks now. I think it's Produce Perks Midwest, so it's not just in Cincinnati. So there are some people who are thinking along those lines about food being their medicine. 2,500 years. It takes us a while to get back to what really worked 2,500 years ago.
Yeah.
One other thing that I would mention too, kind of follows up on what Peggy was saying as far as diet and eating well. I'm involved in the Weston A. Price Foundation. And Nourishing Traditions, that's the title of a book, but it's also the way to learn how to eat. And I just find that kind of mind-boggling that we don't know how, that many people don't know how to eat. That just, I shake my head at that. I grew up on a farm, and so I guess I was lucky. We just ate what grew there. But as so many people don't know what to eat and how to eat it and how to source it and how to prepare it and stuff like that. So Weston A. Price Foundation is a great resource. And there's recently established a chapter here in Cincinnati. And actually they're having their kickoff event this Saturday, October 17th. So if you do an internet search for Weston A. Price Cincinnati, you'll get all the info. It's a free event, and you'll meet other people that are searching for good food, and there'll be some farmers there too. So it's open to everyone. It's free. So maybe I'll see you there.
Thank you. So we got a comment from Vicki Ray Thorne saying that she's been gluten-free for several years to manage symptoms of fibromyalgia, and has been slowly cutting out foods that cause inflammatory responses and feels much better. So, and I think we all know that, but I also think that that kind of eating is sometimes very difficult to maintain over a period of time. I don't know. Vicki, do you have trouble with that? Has it been hard for you to maintain that?
I'll unmute. I found several years ago that my fibro symptoms went away, and if I didn't eat sandwiches and pastas and things like that. And when my kids were little and I wasn't quite as committed to feeling as good as I could, it was difficult, because if you're out and, peanut butter sandwich is an easy lunch with kids, or pick up a burger or whatever. But the past 5 years, I have been diligent with it. And, if I go out for a burger, I can get a burger without a bun.
Right.
I mean, it's just that simple. And the thing I found too is, and I just did it last weekend, I thought, I haven't had wine in weeks or months probably, because I had found that I have a hangover for 3 or 4 days if I have like a half a glass of wine. And, I'm 65 years old, and I just actually inherited a farm. I've never farmed. I'm off on an adventure to do regenerative agriculture and grow healthy food in a 70-acre farm that my family's had, fourth generation for me, that was restored over 30 years into a native grassland by my parents. So it's like, I think it's perfect to do grow healthy food, save, reverse climate change, basically my chance to save the world. And basically, but I don't have time to feel like crap for 4 days for a half a glass of wine. And so over time, what I found is that I'm not an instant gratification person. That's what I've really learned about myself, is I play the long game. And so it is easy for me at this time in my life to say no to carbs, because I know how I'm going to feel for the next 3 days. And it's really not worth it. I don't sleep. I gain weight overnight. I feel heavy. I feel achy. My muscles burn. And it's like, no, I'm done. It's healthy living for me. so that I can make my goal of living to 111.
Okay, sounds great.
And do
Well,
this.
and I do think that, I mean, you mentioned instant gratification, and I think that the United States is probably instant gratification on steroids.
Mhm.
So,
Yeah. Yeah, I believe our kind of our modern life sort of supports pharma and the magic bullet, the magic pill, right? You know, we want to lose weight immediately and not necessarily put the work in to, you know, walk to the mailbox or whatever, whatever example. I think that's another sort of component of of why there's such a struggle with eating well and tying it into good health. It's like two separate entities when in fact it's very intertwined.
Had anyone else heard anything about plant varieties, plant breeders, breeding for increased sugar, and that actually some of our modern produce is getting into the range of having enough sugar in it that it's actually a problem as well, but that's another source of sugar in the diet. I can't remember where I read that or saw that, so I just wondered if anybody else had heard anything about that.
I have not heard information about that, but it doesn't surprise me though. I feel like it seems like there's much sort of manipulation to agriculture and to some of the to the seeds that are available to us, and they're manipulated in such a way to ward against diseases to them. It doesn't necessarily surprise me that they would sort of tweak it a bit to make it more tasty, or more sugar in this case. But I haven't read that. It's really interesting. That's scary.
I believe that is true. Certainly we see it in sweet corn. I mean, the varieties that are most popular are incredibly sweet. The varietal names, Honeycrisp apples and Sugar Snap peas, suggest that that's what they're doing.
But yeah, now that you mention it, I was trying to think of examples, but yeah, no, the sweet corn over the last 20 years, they've gone from just the standard hybrid to super sweet and extra super sweet. So the sweet corn is definitely and it holds its sugar over a longer period of time. Used to be you had to pick, you want to pick sweet corn and eat it within, a couple of days. But with and I forget it is it's a genetic change, and I don't understand the terminology, but sweet corn over the last years has definitely been made sweeter.
It keeps the starch. They found some genes that keep starch from converting to sugar quickly. I don't know. What I don't know is whether those super sweet varieties have higher sugar than the old varieties, say at peak, but they will hold it longer and not convert it over to starch.
I think it's higher. Yeah.
Yeah, I've heard that the apples that Johnny Appleseed planted, actually, those were only edible for cider, that people really didn't eat them as a snacking apple. Has anybody else heard that as well, that it was primarily for cider?
I've heard that.
Thanks, Karen. I got to go cook dinner.
All right. Hopefully it's good nutritional, right?
Yeah.
Thanks, Marcy. I saw your comment about the 80 acres again and their nutritional, how they can tweak the nutritional density by putting different stresses on the plants. So yeah, we need to follow up on that. And I think you had a connection with them.
Yeah, I know Melanie Atkinson, who's one of the, I don't know, founding members exactly, but she's put money into it, a lot of money and time into it. So So yeah, if you want me to talk to her, just let me know. and
Thank
see.
you.
Thanks, Marcy.
Did anyone else have any comment they want to make? I want to comment about the vegetable daily doses by state. Does anyone else want to talk
Yeah.
before I take up too much time?
I had a question that I wanted to ask Caren, which you can answer or avoid as you wish. What do you think of our current approach to a COVID-19 vaccine and having all of these pharmas involved and having them actually produce millions of doses before they even know if it's an effective vaccine?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, when I heard that they were going into production without really having it be, fully tested, it seems wasteful, because chances are it's not going to work. I mean, I think what I didn't show was, sort of the amount of medications that are kind of tested and fail and do not get through to the market. And I have to think that, vaccinations are a little bit more tricky. You're sort of dealing with the immune system. Everybody kind of has a different baseline. It seems more tricky. I know we've heard about, what is it, Project Warp Speed or whatever goofy marketing, whatever name it is. I'm concerned. I think that, I think it's wasteful to sort of go into production so fast. And, I think it's, sort of more diligent to, go through and allow the process to play out as it's intended. The good thing, though, I think, and really interesting is that I don't know that we see this very often at all in in pharma research, is the pharmaceutical companies all coming together and being involved with with our with our leadership and the White House. I'm sure it's maybe one or two big guys that have connection, or maybe they all do, I don't know. But to have sort of that collaborative and competition going on, I suspect that's a healthy situation in this case. And I hope, and I believe that the brightest people are on this case. The thing that I would really like is that, like COVID-19 is awful, but I think, wouldn't it be great if we had the same level of diligence and focus on rare diseases or cancer? We've been researching this for many, many, many years and do not have a cure yet. It'd be terrific to have that level of sort of, focus on those diseases too, because they deserve it too. Those are big problems as well for many, many people. But so I think I'm glad to see the collaboration. I'm glad to see the attention and people stepping up. I do hope that they are, sort of allowing the research to play through. That recent news article, this was a few weeks ago, about I think it was AstraZeneca's trial, where they put a pause, and people were sort of freaking out about that. I thought that was a really, really good sign. Not that you want anyone to have, I think it was like a CNN, like a nervous system, something happened, serious thing. But I was encouraged to, see that being, sort of playing out, because you do not want to ignore something like that. You know, it's much worse to just, you know, go forward with something and have it be worse than the actual COVID, right? So.
Thanks for sharing your thoughts on that. One of the things that, since I've worked in the HIV/AIDS community for many years, we certainly, no one jumped on that bandwagon immediately. And I know the virus is a little different, but I still think that we still don't have any kind of a vaccine for that. And we still have millions of people dying every year, particularly in Africa. And it's a disease that we need to be looking at. So cool. All right, Steve, anyone else have questions? We're probably going to wrap up within the next 5 or 10 minutes here. So go ahead, Steve, if you had a question, unless someone else does. Oh, Lisa made a comment, a Mark Hyman book called Food Fix that was recommended. So we will, she said she'd report back on whether or not it's really good. So she'll let us know about that later. Thanks, Lisa.
Yeah, so on the graph with the daily intake of vegetables by state, I thought that was fascinating.
Yeah.
That the country, and I forget what the scale was, whether that, I assumed it was significantly different from the high to the low. But California and Oregon, and I think it was New Hampshire, were
Right,
all
New Hampshire high, yeah.
That must be, yeah, it must be lifestyle, not because produce is cheaper and everybody buys it because it's cheap. And I noticed Illinois was one of the lightest shades, and I don't know if that's the meat and potatoes part of the heartland with no vegetables, but
a lot of the heartland was low, right?
yeah, and Ohio wasn't too bad, but some of the southern states looked kind of decent. But and I wonder, French fries, does that count as a vegetable?
It's potato.
Yeah, it's a potato. Yeah, but anyway, so yeah.
What about ketchup? Is that a fruit?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you know, though I think yeah. So California was green and Oregon, right? So the West. I think you know, but California. I've got family in California, and you know, things taste great in California to me. You know, it seems like you know, a lot of things are grown there. You know, you can get avocados, and you know, just there's it. If you're not, we've always said if you're not cooking or eating well in California, it's your own fault. You know, I mean, I think here we also have good food here, but it's much more seasonal. You know, and I wouldn't say it's necessarily as generally as you know, as stretch and variety, you know. So I don't know, I kind of feel like I have to work harder than my sister does in California, but in terms of making, you know, a meal of it all. But you know, so if the food is good, it's easy to eat it, I think.
Okay.
So,
right. Good.
Well, Corey, I just wanted to, before you sign everybody off, thank the Southwest chapter for bringing together our OEFFA members in such a wonderful and informative way. OEFFA really appreciates you, Corey, for all your help in putting it together, and Steve is the chapter president, and especially Karen for presenting. And I wanted to put a little plug in, first and foremost. Thank you to all of you that are members and certified farmers with OEFFA. We appreciate you. If anyone on the call is not a member, I am in the office to help do that, and I'll put in the chat box, help you become a member if you're interested, and also to tell your friends. Karen is a consumer member of ours, so just to remind everyone, you don't necessarily have to be a farmer to be a member of OEFFA, and as tonight has proved, there's a wealth of information that we're working daily to connect people with, like our Good Earth Guide, just to find produce and be eating well all year round. And OEFFA is really hoping to help with that networking. So it's OEFFA.org/membership.
Great. Thank you, Christy. And if any of you joined us a few minutes late, we want to make sure that we get your name so that we know that you were here. And if you could just put your name and email address in the chat box, that'll help us keep a list of who's here. And Christy said that she would send a recording of tonight's thing to all of us who attended. Please feel free to share that with family members and friends. And then our next meeting is on November 8th. And I believe we're going to be talking a little bit about marketing and the possibility of different kinds of labeling. And I think Dave Rosenberg was going to help get some parameters ready for that for next meeting. So you'll all receive a reminder of the meeting. Okay. Oh, and Vicki Ray just said that Mark Hyman's book is excellent. So we might get a report from one of you next month on that and a little bit more information. And we hope that what we can do with our SWOEFFA chapter is do a lot of networking. I've read a good book, list it so that everybody can see that, if you've seen a good movie or whatever. All right, thank you, Lisa. Also, we are looking, there's going to be a new chapter of OEFFA, which is going to be a market gardening chapter. And
sorry, maybe I can't type. So yeah, there's a market gardening chapter's been going since what, January maybe? And we did one virtual farm tour in August, and we're going to do the next one on the 22nd of October. So I'm sure Christy will be posting that, but it went really well last time. We did it like live in person, so you can have the chat for questions and just walk through the farm. So it's going to be Mission of Mary's farm.
cool. Good. Thank you. And is that different than the marketing chapter? It's separate from that.
Yes.
Oh, okay. That's how I had gotten the two confused. All right. So thank you, Lisa, for sharing that. And okay. And Vicki mentioned that Kiss the Ground is a documentary on Netflix that we might want to see. That's in our chat box that we can look at too. Okay. Any parting comments? Karen, that was an excellent presentation. Thank you so much. And it stimulated a good amount of thought and questions and discussion. Welcome to those of you who attended for the first time. Remember that even if you're not in Southwest Ohio, you are welcome to attend any of the OEFFA chapters. For the foreseeable future, probably through next spring, we will be continuing Zoom meetings, unfortunately. It would be wonderful if we could see each other in person. It'll be even more wonderful when we can see each other in person and share smiles and good food and things like that. So please keep us in mind for November 8th. And thank you for attending this evening. And thanks, Christy, for doing all the work you do with OEFFA's chapters. We really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Everyone take care. Be well.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Thank
Good
you.
night, everyone.